Dan Alexander has done many of our veggie classes and is wonderful in talking about all different kinds of vegetables and all the different kinds of ways to plant growing and edible things in your garden. So I'm excited about today. But without further ado, we're starting the How to Grow Your Peppers. It is the pepper party at all of our slopes. Our slopes are full of vegetables and peppers right now. Definitely come in. We're actually full of so many flowers. It's beautiful out there. And it's probably the best time of the year to come see the stores. So if you are interested in seeing a beautiful landscape of flowers and edible garden stuff, come to any of the slope gardens and have a good time. And I'm going to pass it over to Dan today. I will be on the other side of this, answering your questions. And yeah, enjoy the talk. Thanks, Dan.
Thanks, Taylor. Welcome, everybody. We're going to talk about peppers and how to grow them and what fun they are. These are all peppers in front of me. They all look kind of similar. You can see kind of shiny leaves, and they grow kind of straight for a while, and then they make flowers at the top, and then they have to branch out. And so every time they branch out, they make some more flowers and fruit, and then they have to branch out again. So they make kind of a nice compact, shrubby type of bush, as opposed to, say, a tomato, which often it grows more of the vine. Peppers are much more manageable as plants and can be grown in smaller spots, smaller containers, and give you lots of nice looking and great tasting fruit. Peppers are another of our New World vegetables. New World meaning this hemisphere. They originated in South America and in Amazonia, and that's where their diversity flowered. And there are many, many species of peppers, but we cultivate about 5 of them. And of those, most of them are one species, Capsicum annuum, misnamed as an annual by the botanists of the world. In the tropics, they are a perennial plant, meaning they grow year after year. But in our climate, they're generally grown as an annual because they'll die during the winter if they're left out in the cold. Doesn't mean they can't overwinter. I have one here that I overwintered a little bit inside and then outside as soon as the danger of frost was over. And it is usually grown as an ornamental pepper, but has all the characteristics of any other pepper plant. And Jen, is it in the frame here, this one?
Yes.
Yeah. You can see how the peppers on this one stand upright. And it's thought that the original peppers grew that way, were little tiny peppers that grew up and attracted birds. And it turns out that birds are not sensitive to the chemical that makes peppers hot, capsaicin and its relatives, where mammals are. So the idea is that among the environmental or the evolutionary botanists is that peppers developed a capsicum to keep larger mammals from eating the fruit and the seeds and crushing them. And instead, birds would eat them. The seeds would pass right through the bird. The bird would fly off and deposit the seeds in another location to spread them out and deposit a bit of fertilizer along with it. And then they could grow. In my experience, for instance, I will have occasional rodent problems, and the rodents won't eat the hot peppers, but they will eat the plants. So one has to be a little bit cognizant of the fact that if you've got rats or voles, they will eat the plants, even though they won't eat the fruit of the hot peppers. Now they will eat the sweet peppers. There's nothing to deter them about a sweet pepper. I think what we're going to do is go over some planting techniques. I want to talk about starting some from seeds as well. As peppers become more popular, and they seem to be more popular, more and more varieties of peppers are becoming available at your local garden center, or at least they're available to your local garden center. I noticed this week on the availability list of one of our principal growers, Sweetwater, that they have more varieties of peppers available to us than tomatoes. And I think that's a first. The mid 30s in the number of different varieties of peppers available. Now, no garden center can keep 35 or 40 different varieties of peppers in stock because, well, they've become more popular. They're not, you know, the most popular thing in the world to grow. So you may find 15 or 20 different varieties if you're lucky. Some garden centers may only have half a dozen or so. Just as I recommend to people when they grow tomatoes, if you're a yearly pepper grower, you know, try a new one each year and see how it goes and see how you like it. And slowly you'll build your repertoire of the ones that you really like to grow and that do well in your location. What is that location? Peppers like full sun and even more heat than tomatoes enjoy. On my deck in Fairfax that faces south, it's too hot for tomatoes, but the peppers thrive. And they really seem to enjoy the heat that builds up reflectively off of the deck. They don't have any burning of the leaves the way the tomatoes will. They don't mind drying out between waterings. In fact, it's probably good for them. So the hottest location you've got is probably the right place for the peppers. They have to have a full day of sun to do well. And that really is sun between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. The sun before that and the sun after that isn't strong enough to really do them much good. After all, like any plant, it's the green stuff in the leaves that collects the sunlight, the energy from the sunlight, and turns it into food for the plant. And without that energy, they can't develop the proteins and the sugars that they need to make fruit. And the process is that they flower. They make these pretty little flowers. They're all a little bit different, but you can see here. They make kind of a nodding little flower, and when that gets fertilized, and they're self-fertile, the flowers can fertilize themselves, then the pepper will start to grow where the flower is. And I think we have, yeah, this is a little budding bell pepper right there. It's really the swollen ovary of the plant surrounding the seeds that makes the fleshy part that we eat. Yeah, this little guy, now this is a new one this year that's available to us called Guindillas de Tolosa from the Basque area of Spain. And you can see how compactly it's growing. This is a 3.5-inch tiny pot. It's flowering like crazy and making its kind of long, slender, pale green fruit. Since I haven't seen this one before, I don't know whether these mature red. Probably they do. But they're generally, according to the tag, picked green and pickled in white wine, or maybe white wine vinegar. It says white wine, but I don't know if you can pickle in wine. I'm not sure about that. I think it might mean white wine vinegar. So you want the sunniest, warmest spot you've got. And then if you're going to put them out in the garden, they need a little bit of space, not a whole lot, about 2.5 feet apart. Is dandy for most of the varieties. Some are a little smaller. Shisha toes, for instance, you could probably put 18 inches apart. And some are a little bigger. But they grow fine out in the garden once the soil warms up a little bit. We've had a long, cold spring here this year, which is wonderful in terms of rainfall, and the plants, if you look around the area, are all really happy to have all this water. Oak trees especially look like they're very happy to finally get some water down where their roots can really get at them. But it means that the soil is still cold and wet, and it's probably going to be another month before the soil starts to warm up. When it stays wet like that from groundwater, it stays pretty cold. And so I am recommending to people this year for both their tomatoes and their peppers that they first plant them into a little bigger container than you buy them in, and grow them for somewhere between 2 and 4 weeks, depending on how patient you are, in that container, so that they warm up every day. The roots will warm up every day, and they'll get a little cold at night, but not any colder than the ground is, basically. So that'll give them a real head start. They'll be healthier when you set them out in the garden later. And you might say to yourself, well, why don't I just wait a month then and buy them in a month, and you can grow them for me? And the answer to that is, well, you just won't have the selection at that point, and you don't know what's going to be there. So I would go out and get the varieties that you want and pop them into a gallon can, or if you buy a gallon size, pop them into something about twice that size for the next few weeks, and put them, if you have a south-facing location that's against the house, that's a wonderful location to grow them out for a little while. They'll get reflected heat from the house, and they'll get heat radiating from the house at night and keep them warmer, and they'll grow even better. So do that. If you're going to put them in a raised bed or grow them forever in a container, the raised bed really isn't any different than growing in the ground in terms of temperature. So I would wait before putting them in a big raised bed. If you're going to put them in a container forever, then step them up a little bit. If you put a teeny tiny plant like this into a relatively large pot like this, you're going to have a lot of very cold, wet soil that's going to take a long time to dry out, and it's almost like putting them in the ground. But if you put them in a smaller pot, especially a black pot that absorbs some heat, they'll grow really well for this near time period. And then once the roots have filled up the 1 gallon size pot, then it makes sense to put them in the big pot. And this size pot, I don't know exactly what the volume of this pot is, but this is a nominal 7 gallon pot. It's about the same, I think. Yeah, roughly. And I say nominal because they're not anywhere near 7 gallons in volume, but this is what the business calls the 7. But this is plenty big for any pepper, and in reality, even the what we call 3 gallon, sorry for the noise there, 3-gallon or 5-gallon pot, this size would be dandy for growing most of the peppers the entire season. Their volume needs are minimal. So while a tomato would not be happy in this container for the whole season, a pepper would be happy in this smaller container for the whole season. So they're very easy to manage in that respect. And you can even, you can put them in a pot this size, it wouldn't be all that heavy, and you can even move them around as the sun moves around if you need to do that. Now, the capsicum annuums have most of the types of peppers that we eat routinely and that are available in stores routinely, with a couple of exceptions. Habaneros are of a different species, Capsicum chinense, and they share the very high heat with some of the newer hybrids, like the Carolina Reaper, and this is the Trinidad Scorpion. This was once the hottest pepper in the world. I think Carolina Reaper probably still holds the record. Somebody's working on a hotter one. This is a ghost Buchalokia. Sorry, was I off camera there? Carolina Reaper. You can see they all look very similar. This is the Trinidad Scorpion. And they are among the super hot peppers, along with Scotch bonnet. And some care should be taken with them to avoid fiddling with them and putting your hand in your eye. Things like that can be very uncomfortable. In general, the capsaicin, although it hurts, it isn't actually doing any damage to you. It feels like it's burning you, but in fact, it's fooling your senses into thinking that you're being burned. And it's actually, I mean, there are probably exceptions if you overdo it too much. I'm sure that some teenagers have probably damaged themselves in their competitions for who can slam down the most super hot peppers or things like that. But for most of us who are using them for culinary purposes, we're not going to hurt ourselves with them. And of course, these super hot peppers are usually used in sauces, or where a little bit goes a long way. And I grow them more as a novelty than anything else, just as a Excuse me.
We have a co-presenter.
We have a co-presenter here. A little bit of the hot peppers goes a long way, and you can use them by chopping them up really finely. If you cook them, you cook a little bit of the heat out. But in general, you're not going to need more than 1 or 2 plants to satisfy your needs. With the milder peppers, if you like to grow peppers as I do, to eat fresh and to saute and to put into sauces, I'm a big fan of the long Italian sweet peppers. My very favorite is one called Jimmy Nardello. And if you search the internet, you can get all these wonderful origin stories for the Jimmy Nardello pepper, where Jimmy's grandmother or grandfather or great-grandmother or great-grandmother came over from Italy with these peppers from Calabria or from one place or another place. They're all different, the stories. But in any event, the peppers are wonderful, very easy to grow, very prolific. and we'll give you a sweet pepper that if you've never eaten one before, will make it so that you will be bored to tears by the next store-bought bell pepper that you buy. The flavor is very sweet, very intense. The flesh is very thin. So when you saute them, they cook very quickly. If you chop up some of the Italian frying peppers and saute them with onions, you get this immediate hit of oniony, peppery flavor and odor that tells you immediately that you're going to like this. This is a packet of seeds that happen to be on our rack here, which is simply called sweet red grilling pepper. And by the picture, it appears to be the type of pepper that I'm talking about, even though it doesn't have a particular name. These are generally referred to as Cubano type peppers, not necessarily because they came from Cuba, but peppers were often given names by or categories by people who happened to run across them in a particular place and said, oh, well, that's a Cubano then. Just as a habanero isn't from Havana either. And for that matter, the capsicum chinense isn't from China because all of the peppers are from South America. And in fact, after they were spread around the world by the Portuguese and Spanish traders who took them from South America, each area, geographical area of the world started to develop their own selections of peppers and develop the tastes and flavors that that particular geographical area liked. So you found peppers in China that were a certain kind of peppers, and it's probably wrong to say China. It would be all kind of different regions of China would have different types of peppers. Africa has its peppers. Europe developed different peppers, especially in Italy, Spain, Portugal, and parts of France, south part of France. So there are as many types of flavors, styles of flavors as you can imagine, and probably a lot that we can't imagine, having not tasted them all. So when you pick one out at the nursery, look for one that just generally speaks to you as healthy, meaning the leaves are green. If they're yellow or if they're brown, don't bother with it. You'll find a better one. It's okay if they're already flowering. That's not going to keep them from growing. You'll find that some are quite young, like this one looks very young. And I'm betting, well, this is horse race day today, so I'm betting that it's not too root bound. The roots have gone all the way down to the bottom of the pot, but they're not too full, as opposed to, and you can see how kind of skinny and fresh looking this is, as opposed to this one, which looks to me like it's going to have more roots. And you can see it's filled out the pot a little more. They're kind of
coming at the bottom.
Coming out the bottom of the pot. And this one is a good example of what we need to do when we're going to plant it. We want to break this pattern of the roots just growing to the edge of the pot because we want them to grow out into the new soil. And so those who have been with me before know that my favorite tool for that is the plant label. But you could also use your pruning shears. What I usually use, these are actually Jen's pruning shears, so I'm not as familiar with them. But what I usually do is just use the back of the blade and scratch it up, or use the label and scratch it up so that I'm breaking the roots a little bit on the very outside, which is fine, because then they'll grow out. And I especially want to do it on the bottom. And in fact, I'll just clip the bottom.
Ouch.
Ouch. Now, if I were Jen, I would grab it here and just rip it, but I'm gentler. So now it's ready to go into some fresh soil. And what I've created here by scratching this up, it not only interrupts the pattern of the roots, but it also makes more nooks and crannies for the new soil to join this root ball, so that there's lots more interaction than if I just plunk it in the ground. And you can tell that actually works by doing it both ways, and then going back, I've done this, going back and pulling them out to see how much they've grown out into the new soil. And often one which you just pull out of the pot and plunk into the soil won't have grown out much at all. They just kind of sit there. But if you do this, it'll help it a lot. And then if we're going to just move it into the next size container, that's this one. This is a 1 gallon, nominally 1 gallon. It's really looks to me like it's less than a half gallon in reality. But what we want to do is add a little bit of a balanced fertilizer, and balanced means that the numbers on the package, this is Sure Start, which is sold as a sort of starter fertilizer, but its numbers are 462. That's nitrogen first, then phosphorus and potash. Those are percentages. So of all the stuff in this bag, 4% of it is nitrogen. Or with the tomato vegetable food, it's again 4% nitrogen, a little less phosphorus, and a little more potash. But I would call these both balanced fertilizers because they have all three numbers in roughly the same percentages. This is Down to Earth's BioLive fertilizer 542, again balanced, as opposed to this is fishbone meal, which you can see is less balanced, 4% nitrogen, 12% phosphorus, and no potash at all. So this is not a balanced fertilizer. Why did I put this out here? Because it has a lot of calcium in it from the bone meal, and peppers, like or as tomatoes, need some calcium in the soil to avoid getting what's called blossom end rot, which is a function of not being able to use the calcium in the soil well. So if you know that you have plenty in there, you don't have to worry about it so much. You still may get it at the very beginning of the season. The first couple of fruits, whether they're tomatoes or peppers, could get blossom end rot, and then later on, as the calcium becomes more available to the plant, it'll go away. There are also other ways to deal with it, so talk to us if you have that problem. Now, I'm going to put a little soil in this container.
It's organic potting soil.
This is the sloped organic potting soil. I like a potting soil that retains a fair amount of moisture for the peppers, and has some fertility in it already. So for instance, this has, when I say fertility, it's basically fertilizer elements.
Compost.
I'm reading upside down here. Feather meal and bat guano are the main things that give it some nitrogen and some phosphorus mainly. That's already in there, but then I'm going to add a little more. I happen to have an open bag of Sure Start here. So I'm going to add about a tablespoon of Sure Start and just kind of mix it in here so that there will be a little immediate fertilizer. And Sure Start, as well as the other E.D. Stone for fertilizers and the BioLive, also have added bacteria and fungi that are beneficial to the plant growth. And so it gives them a little bit of a head start. So my little guy here is going to go in the pot, and I'm just going to basically take a handful of soil out, put him in, and put the soil back in. Now, unlike tomatoes, there's no real advantage to planting peppers deep. Peppers, unlike tomatoes, make, let's see if I can find a good example here. These are so young, but they make bark, basically. And I don't think you can really see that, but right down at the bottom, you're starting to see some brown, and that's lignum, which makes bark. And they won't send roots out from the stem the way tomatoes do. So there's no real reason to plant them deep. It generally won't hurt them. But here we are, planted in our 1 gallon container, a little bit of water and some sunshine, and it's going to grow some more and make us some more of these cute little peppers, which are a little spicy and quite flavorful. And I'm going to try one this year and then try pickling them and see how that works. Buen días de Tolosa. So always keep your label because if you really like the pepper, you want to know what it is for next year. If you really hate it, you want to make sure you don't buy it next year. Keep your labels and keep track of how things go.
Do you have to stake that? Are you going to stake that at all?
You know, this one is so sturdy that I'm not going to worry about staking it. Although if it were at home, I would, because Jax the monster there would be running around and knocking them over. And so a stake will keep them from getting broken. That's very easy to do. And then similarly, if I was to get a really tall kind of, you can tell that these peppers were grown conventionally, not organically, in a greenhouse, and fertilized very heavily. And that's why they're so big and the leaves are so big and green. Not a knock on them. It's just you can see the difference between the organically grown peppers, which are much more natural in size, and the sort of Jack and the Beanstalk conventionally grown peppers. I would not fear buying a conventionally grown pepper because I would be growing it in my yard, and by the time I picked any peppers, any taint from the way it was originally grown, in my mind, would go away. But in this case, there are 3 sweet Italian peppers in this can, and we don't need 3 in a little container like this. So why not take advantage of it and make it into 3 different peppers? So let's see what it looks like when, save the label here. Let's see what it looks like when we take it out of this can. Now, of course, their roots are going to be tangled up. And the question is, can we just separate the 3 plants and turn it into 3? And I think the answer is probably yes. with a combination of tearing and cutting, we'll just have 1, 2, 3, and we've got a pretty good root system with each one. So we'll just kind of do the same thing again, scratch up that root system a little bit. This part's already scratched up. And then we'll put it in there and drop some soil in around it. And I think it's going to grow really well.
Hey, Dan, I actually have some question that relates to what you're doing right now. If that's okay.
Yeah.
So when you're growing peppers in different size containers and you were saying the differences between them and tomatoes and stuff like that, could you let some of our guests and our people in our stores know what will happen if you leave your pepper in a small container? Like if you left it in the 4-inch or you left it in the 1 gallon, or like what should they expect from maybe a pepper that's a little bit more on the root bound side?
If you left it in the little 3.5-inch container for the entire season, you would end up with what's called a bonsai. Is bonsai chili. And they do very well that way. Now, to make them look really nice, you should take it out of the container from time to time and cut the roots back and put some fresh soil in. And you should keep it small so that the top is in proportion to the roots. But they're actually very happy in a contained space. And they can look very, very good and produce a lot of fruit that way. You generally don't want to do that with the really tall growing lanky peppers. Chili de arbol, the tree chili, probably would not be happy in a small container long term. Although with careful growing, you can grow anything long term in a small container. Look at the Japanese bonsai tradition, and you know that you can grow anything for hundreds of years in a small container. But it does take some doing, and you'll probably have better success if you can move it up into at least a moderate-sized container. Several people have asked the question, well, once they're sort of overgrown in the little container and flowering and making fruit, will they be dwarfed essentially or not be able to grow big and make lots of fruit? And in my experience, that's not the case. As soon as you get them into a bigger container, they'll start to grow again and make lots of fruit for you, even if they're a little bit overgrown. And that's even true of tomatoes, although I recommend taking the flowers and fruit off of a 3.5-inch tomato if you find one that's already making fruit. Certainly remove it so that it'll start to grow again.
Yeah. That's actually kind of towards my next question is, because I know that we talked about that with tomatoes and a few other plants. Do you feel like it would be better to do you feel like it would be better to trim off the flowers or anything that's really small, or if it's fruiting already in that small little container, is that a problem, or let it kind of grow and keep it going?
With the peppers, in my experience, it's not a problem. I generally do that with the tomatoes. If there's a variety I really want and it looks like it's kind of overgrown in a small pot, I usually take any fruit that's already developed off of the tomatoes. I haven't done a controlled experiment, so I don't know if that's really necessary. but it intuitively to me, it says, well, I want the plant to put some energy into growing for a while. And it's too small to be making a lot of fruit, kind of like a little baby fruit tree. You don't want it to putting all of its energy into making fruit. You want it to grow for a while. But peppers have a completely different growing style than the indeterminate viney tomatoes. And so they're going to, as I say, they bloom terminally, so they can't grow any further on the branches that have bloomed. And they have to branch out, so they're naturally going to be bushier than any except determinate tomatoes. So I don't think there's a problem with peppers at all. Yeah.
Nice. Well, yeah, thank you. I have a couple more here and there. Would you like to continue through talks, or would you like some more questions?
Bring them on.
So you were mentioning earlier about how the peppers are, they were first considered maybe annuals, but they are perennial plants and they can be overwintered. But it's not really a habit that many of us do. And I was wondering, what should the end of season maybe look like for a pepper? How should you deal with the plant once it's over? Should you try and overwinter it, or is there any key features that you should maybe look towards if you should do that or not?
Right. The normal season would end about the end of October, you know, depending on the weather. But by the end of October, they'll probably have, if not stopped, at least slowed down the blooming and stopped setting fruit. And the first frost will generally kill them. And if it's a real soggy, cold run up to the first frost, that could kill them too. So to overwinter them, generally speaking, you have to bring them inside, which could mean a greenhouse or a greenhouse window, or indoors in a real bright spot next to a window, probably. Is it worth it? You know, that's for each person to decide, and for each plant. If you are intentionally growing bonsai, for instance, then you definitely want to bring them in and have them survive the winter so they can get bigger and gnarlier looking the next year. Will they produce more fruit the next year than one that you get fresh? Probably not. They take quite a while to recover from the winter and to start going, and a fresh one from seed will probably give you more fruit. So it's really kind of an exercise in, can I do it? Do I want to do it? And is there a variety that, for instance, this little guy, he'll probably pop out and look very good and big and full of peppers earlier than I could have gotten one at the 3.5 inch stage. So it's kind of a fun one to overwinter. But in general, around here, since our season is so long and we have so much growing opportunity, most people wouldn't want to do it.
Nice. And then I was gonna kind of let you go off and talk about any kinds of disease or bug care, anything like that people should watch out for. You mentioned in your outline, which I think everyone received as well, that there's not as many, but maybe speak on that a little bit.
Yeah, in general, peppers don't have nearly the kinds of problems that tomatoes have. There are a few leaf spot funguses that can get on them, and you'll notice that by kind of dark, regular spots on the leaves. And first line of defense there is just to pick the leaves off and get rid of them as soon as you see that, and hope that the plant outgrows it. If that's not working, then one of the newer fungicides that the best broad spectrum fungicides these days are actually bacteria that are packaged up, and they're listed for organic gardening, and they're products like the Monterey what is it called? Complete disease control is a good one that you can try. But other than that, most of the problems we see with peppers are abiotic, meaning they're really cultural problems. Either they're not getting enough light, they're not getting enough nutrition, or the watering is so inconsistent that they're suffering. And in terms of insects, you may get a few aphids early in the season. They usually don't do any real damage to them. Aphid is a little sucking insect. Sometimes it can distort the really young leaves, make them crinkle up a little bit. Doesn't hurt the plant really. And aphids can be just blown off with a strong stream of water, or worst case, you can use some insecticidal soap that'll kill them. There aren't very many chewing insects that like to eat pepper leaves. Generally speaking, not much problem. You can get rodents, obviously, but also things like earwigs can chew on the fruit a little bit. Sometimes if you have a lot of them, excuse me, earwigs can be controlled a couple of ways. The old-fashioned way is to moisten and roll up a newspaper and put a rubber band around it and put it next to the plant, and the earwigs will hide in there during the day. They feed at night when it's cool. And so before nightfall, you pick up the newspaper and shake them all out into a bucket of water with a little dish soap in it so they can't swim, and they sink to the bottom. The less labor-intensive way is to get what's called Sluggo Plus, which will take care of snails and slugs, but it will also take care of earwigs. It has a chemical called spinosad in it, which gets them when they eat it. And other than that, I don't think you'll see very many problems. I would love to see a bird come and ravage one of my pepper plants, but I've never seen that happen. So apparently our birds around here are not used to feeding on peppers, and or maybe I'm not growing the right kind of peppers for the birds. But that would be very cool to see if they would actually eat them. Any others?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is there good companion plants with peppers? I don't really know.
Yeah, same ones as for onions, basically. It's always good to grow some good insect attracting flowers, like alyssum is probably like the top of the list for bringing in good bugs, which will help keep out the bad bugs. And onions are generally planted with sort of the New World vegetables. And it's thought that the scent of the onions makes the world confusing to some of the insects that come in. But the main way that you bring really effective companion planting in is to grow flowers that will attract insects. And then you get a balance in your garden of the insects that are a problem who are attracting the insects that eat them. And that will also attract birds, which eat even more insects. If you tuned into our program with Doug Ptolemy, you remember that baby birds eat almost nothing except caterpillars and various kinds of insect larvae. And so their parents are out scavenging for baby insects, basically, to feed to the young birds. And so if you have lots of flowers that attract insects that are making baby insects. That'll attract birds and other insects, and it'll all stay in balance. I mean, my theory is, you know, if I get a few notches in the leaves, that's fine with me. That means that there's something going on in my garden. You know, it's not a desert, it's a living ecosystem, and there's a few people out there eating the leaves, and then there's others eating them, and others eating them, and we've got something really good going on. So I'm suspicious of a garden where all the edges of the leaves are perfect. I think the only way to achieve that is with chemical warfare, which I don't want to engage in. I was disappointed when I went up to the Portland Rose Garden and saw that all the plants were just perfect. And I thought, oh my goodness, how do you achieve this? It's a frightful concept. Anyway, let's talk a little about starting them from seeds, because if you all become chili heads, you're going to want to try varieties that you probably won't be able to find in your local garden center. And they're just exceedingly easy to grow from seed. So why not try that? And in the outline that you have access to, there's a website called fatali.net. And if you go there, you'll see hundreds and hundreds of varieties of peppers. They're actually in Finland, which doesn't seem like pepper country, but apparently they grow them under glass in Finland, and a lot of them do it hydroponically. But they have a wonderful website, and you can order seeds from them. You have to pay them in euros, but they have a great descriptions, great photos, and great variety. So if you were to want to grow an early jalapeno pepper, and I recommend early jalapeno around here, because just as with tomatoes, peppers can be early season, mid-season, or late season, and you're going to have better success with the early to mid-season peppers than with the late season peppers, because the late season peppers take so long to develop, things can happen in the meantime. So all of these super hots, like the ghosts, those are late season peppers. Regular jalapenos are mid-season, and the early jalapeno is early season, meaning from transplant, these are maybe 6 weeks old, from transplanting this to getting the first fruit should be about 60 to 70 days, roughly. Depends on the weather a little bit. But inside the packet are the pepper seeds, and they look just like the seeds in your bell pepper, except they've been dried and are ready to go. And so if we were to do it by the first method, which we will call put some soil in a pot, put a little pinch of seeds in, cover them up, pat them down so they make good contact.
These are the pots.
Now, these are called cow pots because they're made of cow manure, and they can be planted after the plant comes up. I'm going to water it a little bit so they get going here. They're not going to come up while we speak. But that's all it takes to get them started. And in about a week to 10 days, you'll see little pepper plants coming up. And then you can just, if the best way to do it is just see which plant is the strongest and pinch the others out, get rid of them. So that's one easy way to do it. Another easy way to do it, if I can find my plastic bag. Uh-oh. I thought I wrote it.
Hmm.
Well, I'm going to describe it to you because it's real simple. You take a paper towel. Jen is generously giving to you. And you wet the paper towel. So just take your mister and wet the paper towel. Put the seeds on the wet paper towel and fold it over. And tear this one off. And then and then put it in a plastic bag. Seal it up with about an inch of unsealed at the end. And put it up on top of your refrigerator, where it's a little warmer than your air temperature. And then every couple of days, make sure that it's still wet. And again, in a week to 10 days, the seeds will sprout and you can just pick them up, literally, and put them in little pots. And you'll have as many peppers as you have seeds, because 90% of them will sprout that way. And it's a good way to start tomatoes and other kind of medium-sized seeds. We should probably do a seed starting session where people can play along with us and practice that. That would be fun to do. Let me think here whether there's anything else that's critical for folks. I mentioned that we need some calcium in the soil, and most of the good balanced fertilizers will have about 3% calcium in them already. So you can look on the side of the package, just like at the grocery store, and it'll tell you, in addition to the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potash, this one has 3% calcium and 1% sulfur. Sulfur is an acidifying agent, and peppers like just a slightly acidic environment. This is ground up oyster shell, which is available. This is down to earth. Probably other people make packages similar. This is one form of calcium that's pretty readily available to the plants, not instantly. It still needs to be worked on a little bit by soil bacteria, but it's a pretty good way to get calcium to them. Eggshells, we find out, although they have plenty of calcium in them, take a long time to break down unless you were able to powder them, like the oyster shell is powdered. The eggshells will take years to break down and make calcium available. So don't rely on eggshells. People often ask about coffee grounds, so let's talk about coffee grounds. Coffee grounds are great added to your compost or mixed into the soil a little bit. They are not good laid on top of the soil. They dry out and then they make an impervious layer that the water can't penetrate. So it'll just run off and it won't get down to the root zone. So mix it in with something else. Even into your potting soil would be fine, a little bit of coffee grounds. By the time you've made coffee, by the way, with the coffee grounds, it's not acidic anymore. It's pretty much neutral. So it's not an acidifier. The coffee itself is acidic, but that's because it's taken all the acid out of the grounds, or just about all of it. And
Dan, when you're using your fertilizers, like the oyster shells and stuff, should you apply it later in the season, at the very beginning? Should you do both? Like, is it multiple times?
Right. Peppers are not heavy feeders. They need balanced nutrition, but they're not heavy feeders like tomatoes are. It's always best to get the fertilizer into the soil at the time of planting. And especially something like the oyster shells, needs to be down in the root zone. It's not going to move in the soil. So it has to be there already. You can add more fertilizer from the top during the growing season. And I would say in a container about once a month, fertilizing would make sense, either with a liquid fertilizer or with more of the dry fertilizer. And right through the growing season. Enough of the, even these dry fertilizers, enough of it is almost immediately available when you water, that it'll have an impact, not quite as much as a liquid fertilizer would, which goes immediately, saturates the root zone, but it'll do a good job. And in terms of liquid fertilizers, fish emulsion is a wonderful general fertilizer. There are what's the name of the soluble fertilizer that we have? Maxi is I think is a good quality fertilizer. It's not an organic fertilizer, but it's a good mix, and I tend to use the acid version of it for most plants, on the theory that all of our water around here is alkaline anyway, and so it doesn't hurt to add a little acidity, except maybe for, I wouldn't use it on cactus. I wouldn't use it on South African plants, but other than that, but you can also use the general Maxi fertilizer. Would be great for all of the vegetables. But it is important to fertilize a little bit as you go along, because the plants will use up the nutrition that's in the container, and the smaller the container is, the more quickly they'll use it up. You know, just kind of keep in mind, if I'm minimizing the soil area, that minimizes the amount of fertilizer that the soil can hang on to, and that the roots can eventually get to.
Yeah. Well, cool. You brought up a lot of really good information, and I'm really happy that we can talk about peppers and all these different fertilizers and types. And thank you everyone for joining us today for the live recording, as well as if you're interested in, and you're watching this in the future and you want to join us, look to our website for our upcoming classes. Last thing I would like, maybe Dan, could you go over just your couple top choices that you really like, that people should look out for in the store? I always hear people coming in saying like, Dan recommended this one. Do you have it? Stuff like that. I think they really appreciate it.
Well, I think I already mentioned my absolute favorite, which is the Jimmy Nardello. And if you like that style of pepper, then look for that one. Look for the Italian bullhorn. Look for Bergamo, for giant red Marconi. Then as you move into a little bit spicier peppers, as I mentioned, early jalapeno will give you more and earlier fruiting than a regular jalapeno, but there are literally hundreds of different kinds of jalapenos. Some of them are sweet, some of them are hotter, some of them are tiny. There's one called Grandpa's Favorite that's really cool. It's like a miniature jalapeno. So if you like to just eat them, they're great. Then some of the more esoteric South American and what we call like Asian peppers are great for all kinds of cooking if you have a little hotter palate. Some of the Thai Dragon is a well-liked, quite hot, small pepper that's kind of fun. It's a little hot for me, but I grow a lot of my hot peppers for my niece and nephew who have much hotter mouths than I do. So I package them up and take them over to them. I grew the Thai Dragon and the what's called a Vietnamese dragon, which is a little bigger pepper, and they got rave reviews last year.
Cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you know,
and you have a lot on your outline as well, so definitely check that out.
Right. Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think it is about the time. I know it's been a nice Saturday, and I hope everyone can get out there and actually find some peppers and go to our stores and check it out. So again, thank you, Dan, for the wonderful presentation on peppers, and Jen for filming it. I hope that everyone enjoys the rest of their spring, get some veggies growing, and we'll see you in our next class.